This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Good morning. I'd like to welcome everybody to the 11th of January meeting of the London Assembly Environment Committee, and I think it's probably not too late to wish everybody in the room a Happy New Year, particularly because there's several people here that I haven't seen until this day in this new year of 2024. Members of the public may like to follow today's proceedings if they are watching online or following online by looking at the @London Assembly on X and also using the hashtag if they want to join in the discussion Assembly Environment for this meeting. Can I just remind everybody to put your phones on silent, and also if you've put your device on silent but it's still on vibrate, please don't put it in front of the microphone because the microphones will pick up the sound. Could I also ask everyone to make sure that when they are speaking that they move the microphone so that it is picking up your remarks? They need to be probably slightly nearer than you think. And also, if you are going to move it around, can you pick it up by the base and not by the neck, not by the gooseneck, because it would be extremely unfortunate if you were to snap off the gooseneck and break it. Our main item of business today is a discussion with our invited and distinguished group of guests on greening infrastructure. However, we have got a few items of other business to attend to, so I'd like to start by asking our committee clerk, Jack Booth, if we have any apologies for absence today.
Thank you, Chair. We have no apologies for absence.
Thank you. The second item of business is declarations of interests, which can be found on pages 1 to 4 of your agenda pack. Could I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2?
Noted.
Thank you. And could I just ask, has anyone got any other interests that they want to declare? No? OK, thank you. We'll move straight on to item 3, which is the summary list of actions. Could I, and those are found on pages 5 to 30, could I ask the committee to note the completed and ongoing actions arising from our previous meetings?
Noted.
Thank you. Item 4 is greening infrastructure. It brings us on to the main item of business. So I'd like to introduce our guests very briefly. We have Simon Powell. Welcome, Simon. He is the Assistant Director of Strategic Projects and Property at the Greater London Authority. We've got Sam Longman, who is the Head of Sustainability and Corporate Environment at TfL, Transport for London. You're both very welcome. We also have Oliver Jones, who is the Director of Recreation at Camden Council. We have Alice Roberts, who joined us for our first one of our meetings on greening and the second one on green infrastructure. Thank you very much for coming back in, Alice. And she's the Head of the Green Space Campaigning at CPRE London. Alice is with us until halfway through the meeting only, but we're very grateful that you have come back for the second time, Alice. And last, but absolutely not least, we have Councillor Deirdre Costigan, who is the Deputy Leader of Ealing, but is with us today because she is also the Vice Chair of TEC, which is the Transport and Environment Committee of London Councils, which is the coordinating group for the 32 boroughs in the City of London across London. And it will become obvious during the discussions as to why it's so essential that we have Oliver and Deirdre here with us today. And we are now going to start our questions, and as is become traditional, it's going to start with a couple of questions from the Chair to begin with. And I'm going to start with a question that I'm going to address to you all, so I'll just go down the row and ask you to respond. And I'll start with Simon then, what are the biggest opportunities for greening grey infrastructure such as streets and public spaces? And don't forget to put your microphone on.
Thank you, and thanks for the prompt. So in my eyes, the biggest opportunities for greening grey infrastructure are, I guess, the investments that are being made across London, the funding that's coming through from the Mayor in relation to various green policies that the Mayor has got around the aims and objectives, particularly looking at the kind of net zero carbon primary objective by 2030 and the green funds that are being deployed to make sure that various aspects can be taken forward, particularly with some of the work that's going on with Transport for London in relation to creating healthy streets, particularly in relation to the London plan policies that the Mayor has got in relation to development and making sure that as development comes forward, it comes forward under good growth eyes, and effectively it comes forward with improvements to net biodiversity gain, making sure that the urban greening factor is absolutely key in relation to kind of how those developments are designed and how they go through the planning process and how they are ultimately built in practice to make sure that green infrastructure is at the heart of how they come forward. So I think there's a number of ways there that are the kind of the biggest opportunities going forward to make sure that green infrastructure is at the heart of key decisions in terms of how development comes forward in this city.
Thank you. I'm good to move on to Deirdre. Obviously, local authorities have been fairly strapped for cash. What do you think are the biggest opportunities in this area?
Yeah, you're absolutely right in terms of the financial situation. However, local councils in London and have still managed to, I think, deliver quite a lot in this area. And some of the key opportunities, I think, that councils have in London include the road network, which I guess we would look at in the past as just a place for cars to go from A to B and to and also, for pedestrians and cyclists to get from A to B. But I think increasingly we're starting to see the road network as a place in its own right, as a distinct place from, say, from parks, but yet somewhere where we can deliver some of that greening that we wouldn't perhaps have seen in the past. And I know in Ealing, in my own borough, we've moved in our highways programme from an approach of repair and replace the road network to repurposing and reclaiming the road network with more greening on our roads. And that's an approach that's reflected really in local authorities across London. On top of that, there are opportunities to introduce parklets across the capital that many boroughs are capitalising on, and I know Hounslow has a parklet policy that they've implemented, really finding those small spaces that can really add to the greening of London. Verges are an area where Bromley, for example, has got a greening the verges approach. Where a lot of boroughs are looking at wildflowers on verges, as distinct from in the past when we would have had kind of manicured lawns or grey verges. And then I think the final area, of course, is the massive role that trees can play in London. I think almost every borough in London is looking at massively increasing the canopy coverage. In Ealing, our target is 25% canopy coverage over the next few years, and we're planting 50,000 trees. A lot of those trees will go in grey spaces. And there will be challenges, and I'm sure the committee will want to go through some of those challenges later, but trees, I think, are a big opportunity. And I think finally then there's SUDS, which again I think the committee will probably want to look at, which is sustainable drainage solutions. And again, this is something that boroughs across London are looking at implementing where we can. So pulling flooding and surface water out of those grey spaces and into greener and often wetland areas that both address the flooding issues in London and also create new habitats and really the creme de la creme of habitats, which is wetlands.
Thank you. And that really builds on some of the things that Alice Roberts said very briefly in the previous meeting, which wasn't so much about greening of the arteries and the veins, if you like, in between the sort of green open spaces, which very much this seeing healthy streets as being an opportunity for that greening, as you say. I'm going to, and of course, because the London boroughs control 95% of the roads in London and the mayor is only responsible for 5%, it's very important to hear you refer to so many different boroughs. However, let's move on to Camden. We've heard about Ealing, we've heard a bit about Bromley and Hounslow. What's happening in Camden, and also about any others boroughs where you're in contact with colleagues?
Well, fortunately, there's a lot happening in London, I think, in boroughs. And I'll try and do them all faithful justice if I can, but, London is a big place. You don't need to list all 32. Yes,
just say that.
I pick them off one by one. Fortunately, I have worked all over London in my time, and I do live in South London and work in North London, so I see a lot of what's kind of going on.
You've just pleased the entire committee.
Yes, yeah. I think... just generally, if I may, and then I'll go into specifically what we're doing with our colleagues in Islington as well, because we work quite closely together. But the kind of opportunity we see is largely the kind of change of use, particularly of central London, of how central London is being used, and also then how that demand on curb space is kind of changing, and and the desire for green space in that. I think we're all kind of well versed on a lot more people working from home. Central London's kind of businesses are changing, but also we're kind of seeing those central London businesses wanting to have a different environment to bring people back into central London. So we are seeing that kind of desire to respond to kind of change, essentially. And some of that is COVID driven, but some of it is just, naturally it's been heading in that direction for a long time as well. So opportunities around depaving are a key one, but also then in new renewal and new development work, where instead of just having to do very large programs, of which we've just done one, there's a kind of constant change in a borough, so you're constantly adding something different there, but that does change. That does require something a bit different. It requires a staff team and support more generally about why that might be changing, and then obviously the kind of resources to do it in people and in money to kind of make it happen. We'll, I think, focus a lot on curbside today, but housing areas have a lot of opportunity too. We have quite a few projects where we've turned what were car parks into green areas. We are changing where concrete may have been laid for a drying area, or just to make sure there wasn't weeds, changing those kind of spaces into food growing and other kind of green spaces, which is largely to try and tackle a lack of access to green space in deprived areas, because there's that connection there with social housing. So going back to what we're doing in Camden, we've got a fairly rich history in greening grey areas, which is fantastic. It predates me by a long way. Our kind of bespoke, or our kind of mark scheme is the West End project, where as a council we spent nearly £40 million changing the area around Tottenham Court Road. Some of that is very highway driven, turning Tottenham Court Road into a two-way road rather than the one-way system that used to be there. But there's been a lot of public realm investment in there as well. So the whole of Tottenham Court Road has been repaved. We've added sort of 60 trees into the whole area, and we've significantly invested in green spaces into that space as well. So some of the existing ones, like Whitfield Gardens, but also changed some of the stub road areas to make them have greening. And probably the one that I'd most like to talk about is Alfred Place Gardens, where previously, 3 years ago, it was essentially 3 lanes of road. It is now 2 lanes of park and one lane of road, and that has been a fantastic scheme to change that, and it is just round the corner from Goose Street. So if it can happen in the centre of Camden, it can happen anywhere. Obviously it did take a lot of resources to make that happen. It's a long journey. That started in 2016, so this is something that takes time to kind of play through. Moving across to what we're doing with Islington is our Highway Greening Accelerator programme, because we recognise that in places in central London where there's high land value, adding new parks is quite challenging unless you're King's Cross Estate or others. How do we kind of add new green space? And the highway is one where we can see that opportunity. But what we realise from our own work is that it's challenging. Doing it normally is hard. You need a systemic kind of change in how our professional services, like our highway designers, are challenged and are trained to understand what the opportunities are, but also then as a council how we kind of resource those spaces, because highways are, while capital expensive, are very cheap on a revenue kind of side, where green space is the exact opposite. It may be quite cheap on the capital side, but it does cost a lot of money to keep it tidy, to keep it clean, and to make sure it's doing the value that we're all kind of seeking from it. So we have this programme with Islington where we're looking at how we develop a strategic plan of where to do that work, where do we invest our limited resources to make the biggest impact, but also a massive programme of training for our officers, our highway officers and our greening teams, to kind of make sure we kind of draw that together. And probably one of the things that we will have in the coming months is we're coming to the culmination of that work. So by this spring/summer we'll have reports that we can share with the committee. Understanding that good practice from across London. We recognise that we think we're doing good work, but everyone's doing good work. So how do we learn from everyone and kind of bring that all together?
Yeah, I think that's partly the role really of the GLA and the Assembly within it, but also the role of the Tech Committee, the Transport and Environment Committee, to bring that good practice together so that people don't need to reinvent the wheel. They can just borrow from colleagues elsewhere. But that's really interesting what you're saying about getting the teams to change their mindset so that people can move away from, what both you and Deirdre were referring to, which is the sort of, cut it all down to within an inch of its life. And also planting slow-growing and spiny bushes was also something I've come across a lot, so that no one can touch it because it will hurt you if it does, rather than thinking about maybe planting fruit, as you were saying. Alice, this hopefully will be music to your ears, because this is really building on some of the things that you said at the last meeting. Do you want to follow on from our first 3 speakers with a few thoughts of your own?
Thanks. Yeah. So I'm just going to start with just one massive opportunity. So and there's so many things I could talk about, but so Thames Water, in one of the appendices to their main water management plan, say that the need for SUDs in London is that we need to take rainwater runoff from 7,000 hectares of hard standing. So I'm not sure how many of you know that number, but that's the number that we need to make sure everybody knows about. So to take water from 7,000 hectares of hard standing, what you need is, apparently, according to Thames Water, 357,000 rain gardens. So a really gigantic challenge. And so what they have said in the back of their appendix is that they're going to deliver that, but it won't be until mainly after 2040. So in my discussions with very many organisations, not least the GLA and the Environment Agency, but also a number of NGOs, that needs to happen earlier. It must happen by 2040. So the opportunity is to do it sooner. The opportunity to make that happen sooner is by trying to lever in the funding. So Thames Water clearly have to do this, but there are savings in using nature-based solutions. So SUDS is a nature-based solution, obviously, to rain gardens, which has all kinds of other benefits. So I'm sure you're probably all aware of, if you put in SUDS, you can use that to plant a tree, it can host habitat, it can cool the environment and so forth. So a nature-based solution not only tackles water, it tackles a whole load of other stuff. And to get those savings, what you have to do is do it as part of the 15-year cycle where you have to replace road surfaces. So instead of doing it at a different time to when you're changing the road surface, resurfacing, you need to do it at the same time, or you need to work with utilities. So when they're digging up the road, you need to think about putting in the... So this all requires, obviously, a huge amount of coordination, not just because you've got the people who are doing the actual work on the ground, but because you need the money to be coordinated in the way that it's coming in. So, of course, Thames Water need to fund this because that's part of their plan, but you also probably got a lot of people who are going to benefit from it, like the insurance companies. So how do we lever in funding from that? And I think it's that conundrum that if we can nail it, and there is a lot of work going on right now, it's just that what we absolutely need is a really clear delivery plan. And of course the GLA can lead on that, but they can't force Thames Water to do it. They can just try to coordinate. So that's the opportunity, and I think there are a huge number of people who believe it's really deliverable, but we've got to make it happen.
Sam, over to you for the TfL perspective, that extra 5% of the roads, as well as the boroughs. There's a lot to follow on here, from parklets to depaving, which is not a word I especially like, but and then Alice's comments about SUDS and depaving obviously speaks to that. What's the view from TfL in terms of opportunities?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for inviting me to be part of today's discussion. A lot of ground has already been covered, obviously, so I'll just try to build on some of that. I think in terms of greening the grey, transport and the transport network and the estate that TfL has and boroughs more broadly is a massive opportunity. 14% of London's surface is transport-related land, and in central London that rises up to a quarter. And TfL is obviously a big part of London, woven throughout the fabric of London, huge landowner, so a massive opportunity. And the key way we crack this has already really been covered. It's making it part of business as usual. All that investment and that work and that development that's happening already, we need to build in green infrastructure and things like sustainable drainage from the outset. And how we're achieving that at TfL is we have very strong plans and strategies that translate the Mayor's ambitions and the Mayor's policies. But it's really about also culture change and leadership, making it part of everyone's jobs, inspiring our colleagues. We know, and you know well, the huge benefits you get from green infrastructure in terms of making the city healthy, resilient to climate change, successful, And that's actually a real business benefit for TfL in terms of making public transport in particular attractive, walking and cycling. We know we need to encourage sustainable travel, mode shift to active, efficient modes. So the more attractive and resilient we can make the network, the more likely we're to achieve that. Economic vitality for the city, and also will help with TfL's long-term financial sustainability. We also need to provide our people with the tools to do that, so it's a strong part of our management system in how we deliver our projects and our developments to ensure that it's the first choice. So, you know, that we've got the detail and the tools to manage those risks and opportunities throughout the process, but actually some very clear messaging that we're now putting out there. For example, SUDS has to be default for any scheme, and rather than people like me coming in later in the process and arguing for it to go back in, it's now on the engineers and designers to make the case as to why it's not suitable. And I think it's that switch in mindset that's really powerful. And making it a core part of how you go about business planning and how you make your investment decisions. And at TfL, I'm sure you're aware, our new corporate TfL strategy, now green is one of our top 5 priorities. It has equal weighting on the scorecard, so it really is at the top of the agenda now. And we're rolling out extensive training programs to help our colleagues to do the right thing. So building on the massive carbon literacy program that we're delivering at the moment, by the end of March, it'll be nearly 4,000 people would have been training carbon literacy, and that's actually 2% of global training. We've been really inspired by that in-person model, how much it engages and motivates staff, and we're going to be developing this year similar training for green infrastructure and biodiversity. But you need to have the evidence as well and mature your understanding so you can make the case. So you're probably aware that we've produced what is an industry-leading natural capital account. We're looking at how we're going to incorporate biodiversity net gain. We continue to innovate with things like wildflower verges. We've got some ambitious targets around sustainable drainage and delivering trees to really accelerate the progress that we need to make.
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to come briefly back to Deirdre and Oliver now. Simon talked about the London plan and the greening factor, and Sam has just referred to biodiversity net gain, which are both principles that came in for the first time in that 2021 London plan. Actually, they came from a rapporteurship document that I produced and introduced those concepts, and I was very pleased to see them get into the London plan, and they're now going through into local authorities' local plan documents. How important is it that the London plan is now being translated into those local plans, and that the Mayor has the expressed ambition of making London 50% green? Is that really a help for local authorities? Does that act as a sort of rocket booster? Start with Deirdre.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was a really important step, I think, for all London local authorities to have that. You know, the London plan is kind of a founding document for us all, and we look to that. So I think that has, as you say, been a bit of an accelerator across London. I think, though, of course, as we know more about climate and about the impact of the everyday decisions that local councils make, we're more and more realising that it actually is an emergency. Like, people have been saying for a long time it's an emergency, but it actually is an emergency. And as a result, it's quite an iterative process. So we agree targets maybe a couple of years ago that now we realise we need to do massively more. There's maybe steps that aren't being taken globally or nationally, and so as a result we need to do even more at a London level. We need to work even harder at a local level. And so I know in Ealing we're bringing forward our local plan at the moment, and we're looking at setting targets that actually go beyond the London plan for biodiversity net gain, for example. Because we realise actually we've probably got to even step up beyond that original target, and that's potentially an opportunity for the next review of the London plan to look at what the evidence is to kind of push that forward. And we've produced our own local evidence in Ealing, and I know other boroughs also are looking at pushing beyond the London plan requirements. I think there's, of course, a national issue, because the biodiversity net gain rules that we expected to come in nationally, it seems to have kind of disappeared over the last few months. There's a real lack of clarity about whether that will come forward or not. So we do need that momentum and impetus on a national level too, I think. to make sure that those targets are set at the ambitious and right level that we can all help work towards. But in the absence of that, I think the London Plan and reviews of the London Plan and what local councils are doing is helping to set the perhaps more ambitious targets that we need to achieve. And we absolutely think it's doable. You've got to set those targets. We think the evidence is there that you can achieve those targets. The challenges are, though, as Oliver said, is we need to have the funding alongside of that. And I think the Mayor has put in place some quite innovative funding strategies to help to pay for some of this. But there's still a significant lack of national funding. There is a lot of competitive bidding, for example, for SUDS. A lot of it's based on competitive bidding. And we need to have a much more, I guess, needs-based approach to funding for sustainable drainage solutions. And the overall kind of strategic framework, I guess, needs to be clearer. There's not really a national or regional adaptation or resilience framework that we can work under, that it has the strength, the robustness and the enforcement capacity in it that we would require. We are working at a London level, so London councils, as part of our climate programme, which is funded by most of the London boroughs, we've got one strand which is called Resilient and Green, and that is, I guess, the kind of strategic area where we can do some of this work. We're focusing there on leadership, on partnership and on governance. Some of, I think, what the Chair had mentioned earlier about, where this would be led from. So that's where we're leading in terms of London councils. But I think there's a lot more to be done to make sure there's clarity on targets and how we achieve them.
Oliver, if you don't mind, that was a very full answer from Deirdre. I'm going to just move on to the next section because I think we're getting into the detail now. So if we move on from the initial questions into the more detailed ones, and I'm just going to ask Assembly Member Emma Best, who's going to lead off now on trees and greening.
Thank you. I just wanted to quickly come back to Deirdre just off that last question, if that was okay. And you were talking about the useful grants from the Mayor. Just wanted to know if you've interacted in Ealing or made any bids and anything that was specifically helpful.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of examples, of course, across London, but I would know better my own borough. And in Ealing, a great bid that we made and that we've achieved funding from the Mayor is for a green ring around Northolt. It's very close to my heart because I live in and represent Northolt, and it is a fairly deprived area. The green ring will bring together 6 parks to create a walkway between those 6 parks, and it includes in it aspects of SUDS as well. There's a school there that regularly gets flooded. The whole road gets flooded and it brings traffic to a halt. And this bid will include scraping out temporary ponds, seasonal ponds at the edge of a park. That will create habitat but also soak up all that flooding that we've had, year on year really, that have forced the school to close on occasion. So that's, I think, a great example of how the Mayor and the GLA have been able to assist us in not just addressing the flooding issue rather, but also addressing the access to green space. So in a deprived area, we're able to link up those, and there's a health impact as well for people doing what will be a 6-kilometre walk around the area. So that's been really positive. What we need, of course, is we need more. I know funding is tight for everyone, but we would very much appreciate more funding being focused on adaptation and, as Alice says, nature-based solutions.
And sorry, which pot was that from?
That's the... I'll get back to you on the exact name of it. I've forgotten the exact name of the funding pot.
Yeah, just interested in obviously the schemes, and some of them councils find easier to interact with and bring projects to success, and others are more difficult. So it's interesting to know the pots that have worked really well. And just so you said that you in Ealing have increased the Mayor's target. So currently the Mayor's target was to increase the green area in London by 3% by 2050. Is that a target that you think is too unambitious and needs to change?
Yeah, I think if you look at the target across London, and I'm from a represented borough that's outer London. As Oliver has said, there's a big difference between inner London and outer London, and the opportunities to create green spaces. So I think you've got to come up with a target that works for the whole of London, and that obviously is something that the 32 boroughs together are able to deliver on. So I think when we're looking at in Ealing going beyond the current targets, that's more about biodiversity net gain and pushing for a 20% biodiversity net gain. But in terms of being able to achieve that additional green space, I think there are opportunities, and so I think that the Mayor's target could be achieved, even though it does seem to be quite ambitious. For example, in Ealing we've just announced that we're going to create a new regional park for West London, which is a pretty ambitious and innovative approach. Now it will include our first step, the first building block to that is a golf course that we currently have, a municipal golf course. We are going to turn that in to the first building block of the regional park. Now, that's not necessarily grey infrastructure to green, but it's not quite green because it's not publicly accessible in the way that a park is. It's a golf course. So we're looking at doing that, and I know, we spoke, myself and Oliver, earlier about Beckenham, and a similar approach was taking there and turning a golf course into a park. So there are actually opportunities across London to take innovative steps like that. It does take some bravery, I think. So to achieve the Mayor's target, there will have to be bravery across the boroughs and, with GLA and the TfL and TfL to take some of these steps because, we are talking about changing land use and, moving towards a different kind of land use in some areas. So we'll have to do a lot of work with residents for them to understand why we're doing this and the long-term benefits of greening our city.
Okay. So just double checking. So you think that the 3% increase by 2050 is an ambitious target? Just quickly.
So I think we've got to base all our targets on evidence, and we're doing that at the moment in our local plans, and all of the London boroughs are doing similar. You've got to put forward evidence as to whether a target is achievable, what has been done in the past, and what the levers are in order to achieve that target. The big challenge that we all have is finance. So at the moment, there is very little specifically focused funding to deliver on a very, very ambitious target. So I think you've got to set the target at a realistic level that we could deliver with the funding that we're able to expect over the next number of years. But I know, if the taps suddenly come on, which I know we'd all be delighted about, if the funding taps were to suddenly come on, then I would certainly think that you would want to review all of the targets we have and to see if we can bring forward some of this.
Okay. Sam, if I could come on to TfL. The TfL set a target of 1% annual increase in tree numbers on the TfL road network. How did you come to that target, and do you think that target is ambitious enough?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we came to the target in the development of the Mayor's transport strategy at the time of what we thought was ambitious and achievable. And I'm pleased to say that we are meeting that 1% increase in street trees per year until 2025.
And is there a breakdown, and I don't expect that you'll have it now, of the percentage increase for each year from 2016?
I can provide that following the meeting, yeah. I don't have it with me, I'm afraid.
And how does that target relate to the target to increase tree canopy cover on TfL's estate by 10%?
That's a great question. So they are two related but slightly different targets, so we're keeping an eye on both of them and seeking to deliver both of them. We're working with the GLA to mature our approach in understanding tree canopy cover and being able to monitor it better. Watching back your previous session, some of the challenges were brought to the fore, and once we've got better tools and better monitoring, we'll be able to have a more robust estimate. At the moment, using our current tools through aerial imagery, we think the tree canopy cover is remaining broadly stable. With the increase in tree numbers that we're delivering, what we expect to happen is as those trees mature, that tree canopy cover will also increase and help us contribute towards the Mayor's target of a 10% increase in tree canopy cover by 2050.
And do you think with the 1% target that there's a way to make that perhaps more ambitious by looking at the different sections of London? For example, if you had an inner, central inner and outer rings and looked at perhaps having a higher percentage where you've got more space and more ability to do so, do you think we could perhaps notch up that 1% increase every year to something a bit higher in those areas where there's more space and the ability to do that?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to trees, for us, you know, it's about the right tree, right place, right care, taking those opportunities to deliver as part of business as usual, but also recognising all of the things we're trying to achieve in terms of the Mayor's transport strategy. But even just within green infrastructure, trees are a fantastic asset for all the reasons we've talked about. But we also need to think about other types of green infrastructure and the habitats and biodiversity that provides. And that's why the natural capital account that we're developing and the implementation of biodiversity net cane is a really important aspect to that. So I don't have an answer to you for you now because I haven't thought about this idea of having specific targets for specific areas. But that we've got a kind of broader approach for how we try to manage our green infrastructure, protect, connect and enhance and maximise the benefits.
And just on that, is there a breakdown of where trees by borough and where they've been planted by TfL?
I'll take that one away for you as well. I'm afraid I don't have that information with me.
Okay, because that'd be interesting as well to see if perhaps there's certain boroughs that have seen, you know, 0.5 and others have seen 3%, then it would also be good to look at that. Does TfL have a policy on how trees are planted, for example, to ensure trees it does plant are incorporated into SUDS features?
Yeah, so, I mean, I kind of gave you the headline about right tree, right place, right care. And we do incorporate trees into SUDS features. We've got one at Elsmith Road at the moment, which includes trees. So, you know, our policy is to take every opportunity to improve green infrastructure and increase tree numbers and tree canopy cover. And we achieve that through our management system, as I talked about, but also tools such as it's already been mentioned, Healthy Streets Check for designers in designing schemes. Trees that provide particularly shade and shelter are a key aspect of how we assess the health of a street and a design to encourage their inclusion from the outset.
Thanks. What proportion of trees that you plant are replacements for existing trees that are either died or become diseased?
Yeah, I'm so sorry, I don't have that specific detail either, but we will always seek to replace a tree where it has died or is diseased, either in the same location or another location. And as you know, we are increasing overall street tree numbers in line with the target of 1% per year by 2025.
And I think that information, if you could provide it, would be handy because that would go well alongside the breakdown of where trees have been planted to look at the number of trees we've lost and the boroughs in which they've been lost.
Yeah.
Thanks. And how do you ensure the new trees, and you've talked a bit about this with right tree, right care. Sorry, I forgot the phrase, but I remembered the motto of it, but not or the gist of it. Sorry, but how do you ensure the new trees survive, particularly in often hot summers?
Yeah, good, that's a good question too. So, you know, we have a standards and an approach to management which is set out for our different asset types and different parts of the network. But kind of in summary, trees are regularly inspected, and we have an annual tree survey to understand the health of those trees and ensure that they're surviving. But importantly, when you first put in the tree, it's about the right design for that tree in terms of the tree pit to give it its maximum chance of survival and also potentially thinking about the species you might use. So basically embedded within our management system, within our standards, and delivered through the expertise that we have within TfL to manage trees.
And is there any area, finally from me, is there any area where you think perhaps we aren't ambitious enough on the TfL network? Something that you think we're really making good progress here, but perhaps here's an area to focus on, and as a committee maybe that's something we should look at more widely when we make recommendations after this investigation?
Yeah. I mean, as head of sustainability, I'm very ambitious when it comes to environment and tackling the climate and ecological emergency. And
more where other people maybe need to come with you. I'm sure you are the flag bearer.
I mean, you'd appreciate the balance that we have to strike about how we use that limited space. One of the best things we can do is the central objective of the Mayor's Transport Strategy, which is efficient use of road space, mode shift. If you can free up space, that gives you much more opportunity, as well as the benefits that can be delivered through cleaning air, decarbonising. What I'd really like us all to do is inspire and excite Londoners, many of which are already excited about what a nature-rich, green city full of green infrastructure, vegetation, animals, plants is like, and the benefits and the type of city we're trying to build, because you will experience it in your constituency all the time. There's always this tension between the change that will deliver benefits and then the challenges of where there's disbenefits, and the more we can get people speaking up about the positive change and supporting it, making sure we're getting the right design, of course, and considering all those impacts, the better. We need everyone to feel like they're part of the transformation we're trying to deliver for London, as well as enabling them to get on with their lives.
Thank you. Well, my constituency, I'm lucky to be in the heart of Epping Forest, so I don't think anyone minds planting more trees. Excellent. Or more tree canopy. They may have more issues with taking away their car spaces when we don't have good bus or train networks, though. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember Joanne McCartney would just like to make a brief interjection as well, but just before I bring her in, Sam, I just wondered, we understand that TfL is going to be publishing a green infrastructure and biodiversity plan. When is that going to be coming out?
Very soon.
So does that mean tomorrow?
No, not that soon.
Oh, not that soon. Okay.
but within
Next
weeks.
Week?
Within weeks. So it's in its final stages of production, so you'll be getting it soon, yeah.
So
I'm really excited about it.
So before the end of March?
Oh, yes, definitely, yeah.
Okay, before the end of February?
Could be.
Could be.
Yeah, don't want to commit, but
so
it's
not too
imminent. Yeah.
in the next period of time. Yeah. Assemblymember McCartney, Joanne.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to ask, because I represent Enfield and Haringey, and a lot of our rail tracks, whether it be London Overground or the tube network, are out in the open. Certainly in the past, Network Rail has come in for quite a lot of stick because of its basically deforestation along rail tracks. Does TfL have a policy about how it deals with trackside trees? And also, are you involved in any decisions that the tube, London Underground or Overground take in relation to taking out trees along trackside?
So I'm not personally involved in on a case-by-case basis, but we do have a detailed trackside vegetation management policies and plans. And I think you'll probably be well versed of the challenges we have, because they would have come up in your constituencies about, safe, reliable rail network, but also trying to maximise that green infrastructure. So yeah, I mean, we do have that.
And does that factor into your calculations on trees on TfL estate?
So the tree numbers I've been quoting are for street trees. We don't have good data yet on trackside trees, just because it's so extensive to do the surveys that would be required. But in terms of our understanding of our green cover and tree canopy cover, that would be factored in within that.
I mean, in a way, it's a nice problem to have, isn't it, that you need such extensive surveys, because it shows exactly how much trackside TfL does actually manage. A lot of people obviously spend a lot of time in the underground, don't really think about some of the underground lines being above the ground and the extensive tracksides, as well as all the overground trackside that TfL manages. And I've had some vigorous discussion, shall we say, about the removal of trees along the edges of the district line in my Merton part of my constituency, particularly at times when birds are nesting. However, I'm not going to delay by asking for answers on that, because that's a very local issue, and I have picked it up with the Deputy Mayor for Environment. But I am going to turn to Assembly Member Tony Devenish, who's going to continue with some further questions.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, panel. The first question is to Deirdre, please, then Oliver. 95% of London streets are controlled by councils. What actions are local councils taking to increase street planting on the road network, please?
Yeah, as I said in the opening remarks, increasingly councils in London are adopting curbside strategies. And curbside strategies are around, looking at the road space and not just seeing it, as I say, as a place from getting from A to B, but a place that, you can actually spend time in, it can be attractive, you can enjoy, and that can actually contribute to the work that we do on the climate emergency. And those curbside strategies, a marker of all of them and of the work that most boroughs are now doing, is putting trees into the streetscape. And I guess, historically, we have tended to put those trees on the pavement, where there has sometimes been issues with, the roots on the pavement causing issues for the very pedestrians that we want to help get up and down the road. So we're now looking at approaches which would put tree pits on the carriageway with build-outs. And that would allow actually more street trees to be put in some areas, because one of the challenges actually we're facing is we're kind of running out of space in some areas to put in street trees. There's not actually the space on the pavement left without creating, as I say, obstructions. So increasingly we're looking at build-outs into the carriageway and putting street trees there instead. As I said, Lambeth and Hounslow, they both adopted curbside strategies formally, but many boroughs are looking at similar approaches. There is, though, challenges in that, and Oliver mentioned some of them earlier, but planting trees is great, but then you've got to maintain them. I know you get many complaints over the winter months, over the autumn months about leaves. It's quite difficult to be able to deploy sufficient resources as a local council to clear leaves to the extent that perhaps residents would have the aspiration to happen. We know what it's like. You can clear the leaves, the next day they all come down again. So it's a very difficult thing to do, and we've got to find a balance between having all of those trees and residents and perhaps getting more involved in keeping leaves cleared in their area. So that's one of the challenges we have, and we know, all councils are facing significant financial issues at the moment. There's councils going bust. It's quite difficult to be able to continue funding cleaning the streets of litter, but also, having to spend more money on clearing up leaves, etc. That is a further challenge that we've got. So we do need the funding for this, and that's something that's lacking. We were very glad that the LIP funding, which funds a lot of this curbside work and active travel work, was maintained by TfL this year. In relation to the previous year. But actually, the LIP funding that we now get that funds a lot of this is more than 60% reduced on pre-COVID levels. So there's been a massive reduction, and I know that's because of the discussions nationally between central government and TfL as to the funding that London gets. But it does have an impact on what we can do locally in councils.
Oliver?
Thank you. To kind of add on, so trees, we have actually quite an exciting area on our website where you can see exactly where all our trees are. They're pinpointed. You can click on them. It'll tell you the species. It'll tell you their CAVAT value, so how much money they're worth, but it'll tell you how much carbon they've stored and how much they absorb each year. Getting new trees in is challenging, so we personally have a target of 600 trees per year on a stock that's 29,000. That is challenging because the underground utilities are prevalent, particularly in the central areas. So finding those spots is hard. So I can feel for TfL where a lot of their network is in that kind of space. But so understanding where the opportunities are is quite resource intensive. looking after them is a challenge, but we have a 3-year regime, you know, where we prune them, we water them, we look after them. We have a campaign to ask local residents to help fill the watering bags that surround them to make sure that they get the water in these particularly hot summers that we're starting to see. So trees is you know, something where we're trying to fill the gaps in. Where we have more kind of larger scale impact are some of our schemes. So I've already mentioned Alfred Place Gardens and the West End project, which is, you know, a significant investment into that Bloomsbury area and changing the streetscape there quite dramatically. But we're doing that elsewhere as well. So we've got a fantastic rain garden near our office on Camden Street. That's 135 square metres of rain garden built in 2019. But we're also replicating smaller scale versions of that all over Camden, you know, all the way up to Hampstead. You know, there's rain gardens being added. One which I want to kind of name is the Fleet Valley Pocket Park. This is a kind of, we regard as a sweet spot of a kind of rain garden sud scheme, where it was on a fairly redundant kind of footpath space, and we've added a rather large volume of underground storage in that area, and from above ground you've now got playable features and greenery that sits on top of it, so it's doing a really good purpose. It's next to a school, so you know, the children have been involved in it, so it's playing lots of benefits in an area that, you know, previously had, you know, on-street recycling bins on it and some utility boxes. You know, it's really changing those kind of the feel and the benefit of those spaces, because human interaction with these spaces is something to consider as well. We've focused a lot on the natural benefits and the water management, but people find these green environments beneficial for their mental and physical health, and that's one of the reasons why we kind of carry out this work. The two more just to kind of mention is the impact of HS2 on Camden is significant, but as a result of that, we've had significant funding from HS2 to do some work around Euston Station. One of those projects is called Phoenix Road. It is essentially the road that runs down the back of the crick that connects St Pancras Station to Euston Station. And we're at the point now where we've got traffic orders in that area to change that road into more of a pedestrianised space, and we can green that space as well in the coming year or so. One which is more at the conceptual stage that we're working on at the moment is what we call the Bloomsbury Corridor. So this is looking at how we can connect quite extensive range of very small green spaces from Euston down to Holborn, and particularly the British Museum kind of area. You know, the British Museum is one of the most visited attractions in the UK. How do we get people there without, you know, using a taxi? How do we walk them down from the through stations in that area down? So we're working with UCL and, you know, other landowners to work out how we can kind of make a green corridor there, not just for active travel, but for biodiversity value as well, because we've got Lincoln Inn Fields, which is one of our biggest green spaces in Camden, so we can connect that up. And, you know, our leader, Georgia Gould, is very keen on seeing that go all the way up to Hampstead Heath and all the way down beyond our borders, you know, connecting with the work in Westminster to like the Strand and towards the Thames. You know, Strand's had a massive redevelopment piece of work there already. It's looking fantastic. So how do we get that down Holborn and Kingsway is something we're, you know, is very new for Camden. So we're constantly looking at the next kind of opportunities, and that's also in residential as well as the kind of core business areas as well.
Thank you. I should ask the question, I think the councillor have already partly answered it. Is there anything that the Mayor or TfL could do to further support this? Is there you got any particular asks, Oliver, for TfL as you've got them sitting there?
Not to put them on the spot. I think where we have a lot of shared ambition, I think, like Camden Town in particular, where the Red Route runs into local authority managed kind of spaces. So, you know, we have both kind of shared plans in those. So it's really about like harmonisation. How do we make the combination of both our ideas better than individually? And, you know, that's something we're kind of working on with TfL, and, you know, we look forward to kind of like furthering both our ambitions in kind of that space. You know, TfL provide an awful lot of funding to local authorities to do kind of this work, and Camden does benefit from it quite significantly, and it's very greatly received. It's really how we kind of have that coordination work is really the kind of opportunity space to make sure that while TfL have got their transport focus, you know, we're bringing in the kind of rounded community aspect for that road as well. It's not just getting from people from A to B, it's people live adjacent to those spaces too.
Sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just to add to that, I agree with everything that Oliver said, and also it would emphasise the amount of collaboration we do around sharing, learning and working together on things like the London Surface Water Strategic Forum. Really important that we collaborate in the way that Oliver's described.
Thank you. Back to Oliver. So my next question, I think you've already touched on again. Camden is involved in the lottery-funded Highways Greening Accelerator project. What does this aim to do, and what has it learnt so far? And I think you probably already answered that. So.
Yeah, I trailed it a little bit earlier. It's equal between us and Islington, so I'd like that to be really clear. This has been... So as a precursor to this, we both worked on a project called Parks for Health, which is really looking at how parks are a health asset and how they can help communities. Beautifully, that was timed just before COVID and ran through COVID. So you can understand that, from a challenge of making people understand what value their park was for their health, suddenly COVID made that mainstream and people understood that. So we've taken that to the next step, which is how do we get more green space in both our boroughs? We're both very dense. Islington's, I think, the second most dense borough in the country, behind Tower Hamlets. We have a situation where nearly 4 out of 10 of our households don't have access to private green space. So our green space becomes their gardens, essentially. So how do we make sure they have their access to nature and a space to recreate? Not picking on my own title, but how do we give people that kind of space? The land value in Camden as such and the pressure of housing demand does mean we can't just build brand new parks left, right and centre. So we need to look at where we can do that, where we're taking space that is a lower demand or isn't facing the same demand, and the curb area and streets is one of those areas, and also some of the spaces on our housing estates, which I've mentioned previously. So the Highway Greening Accelerator is our project that's culminating in the spring. It's really been born out of understanding, well, how do we systematise what we've already been doing? So we've had some great success in Camden, but if I'm honest, they're quite ad hoc. They've been born out of a single idea, and they haven't really pervaded into business as usual in our schemes, in our highway schemes. So the project's really about how do we make that normal? How do we bring in our green space specialists? We have landscape architects in the business. How do we bring them into our highway work to make sure that, where we're building suds and green areas in the highway, they're the best and biggest impact they can be. And there's various work streams on that. I mentioned earlier about the kind of good practice, and there's training that Urban Design London are running for both our boroughs, and that's between green spaces and highway engineers. And we're also looking at that building a strategic plan of where to invest. So we're making the biggest impact because we do have limited resources, as the councillor's kind of mentioned, and we need to make sure where we do invest it's not it's a scheme that's benefiting the most amount of people, and that work's really exciting. It's looking at flooding, it's looking at heat, it's looking at biodiversity, and it's really bringing all of that information together. There will be we've just made a bid for a second round of funding for that to make that mapping tool kind of really beneficial. But we're already finding massive benefit. We've got 5 schemes that have opened in the last 6 months, that are highway schemes that have got greening. Some of them are quite helpful. They're more like wayfinding schemes, so near the Heath, bottom of Savenake Road, where they help people understand that there's a footbridge onto the Heath. Others are where some parking's been removed, and suddenly we've got the kind of curb space that we can play with. Just to kind of add around the tree side as well, the current curb line as it is quite congested with utilities, so telephone, electricity. So as you go into the carriageway, that becomes less prevalent, so you get more opportunity to put more trees, bigger trees, a slightly different kind of opportunity. And just to also say that the advent of electric cars is also adding a pressure. Where you want the charging facilities is often where we want to put a tree. So we have that tension, and as the councillor's already kind of mentioned as well, there is a tension there. Not everyone wants a tree outside their front door. Not everyone wants a parklet outside their flat, because they do bring a different type of use. They do change the light. They do change the kind of the leaves you mentioned, but also Camden and a lot of London is built on clay. So we have a lot of subsidence issues we need to deal with. Unfortunately, we do have to cut down trees that are causing significant damage to buildings. So we have to do, like TfL have already mentioned, Sam has already mentioned, that we have to do the right tree in the right place. So often we're taking out inappropriate trees and replacing them with more appropriate trees.
Thank you. Very full answer there. Thank you very much. My final question is to Alice. Are there opportunities to learn from other cities such as New York for how London plants and manages the street trees and urban greening, please?
To be totally honest, I'm not an expert on New York, but I could certainly
any other city.
Well, I could. But I think what I could do is say I think we're getting quite a rosy picture of what's going on out there, and it might be worth me just saying a couple of things about how it looks from my point of view.
Yes, please.
So the number one thing I think is about parking policy, and actually, you know, the relationship between parking policy and curbside strategy is just very much in its infancy, but actually not really a lot is changing out there on the ground. Everything is still very much car dominated, and parking is still, you know, still cars are car parking is given a priority over everything, basically. So even on the TfL network, on the A10 gyratory in Hackney, for example, where I am, there's not just free parking, it's uncontrolled. There's a whole stretch where there's just parking. It's not even yellow lines or red lines, nothing. And I've been banging on about it for about 3 years. But I know that the whole of the TfL network, you know, that there is work going on to create curbside strategy for the TLRN, and that should relate to hopefully what boroughs do too. But it is still a fact that that bus routes, cycle routes, SUDs, everything is being currently given second best priority to car parking, even on main roads. So half of London is still free parking. And you know that has a massive cost to it. You know, there is a cost to free parking, end of. So the interaction between those two things is just not being talked about. I would say, since we're here, we're at the London Assembly, and we're trying to, you know, influence what the GLA does. That, you know, I have written to Seb Dance and said, please, could we talk about parking and what influence you can bring to bear over the boroughs, but also what you can do directly yourself on the TLRN. And I didn't get a particularly full answer to that. You know, I was directed to staff who were trying to develop a curbside strategy for TLRN, but there wasn't really an answer to, can we start to influence boroughs on curbside? So this is really fundamentally where the problem lies, is about curbside and what curbside means. So curbside is the side of the road, I guess, but if the carriageway is absolutely huge, like is 3 lanes in either direction, you know, if you've got a very big road, then actually perhaps you could think about using more of that road for other things. This is not just the side of the road, if you like.
We are kind of straying into the next area.
Sorry. So front gardens. So, sorry, I just wanted to kind of say a few things about why it's not looking quite as rosy as I kind of feel. Front gardens, you know, we're currently having to, you know, make representations in Richmond Council because they're making it easier to convert front gardens for parking. SUDs you know, it's happening, but it's incredibly patchy. It's not being done according to a clear plan, and I would say most councillors in most boroughs don't know what's needed. In their borough.
Is there a borough that's doing it better than any others in your view?
I would say Waltham Forest is leading, and there are certainly boroughs that are doing lots, and there is certainly a lot of work going on. I don't want to denigrate what is happening because there is a lot of good work going on, and but there is a need for a big and clear plan to be delivered urgently. So, yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. I don't want to constrain the discussion and the debate because I'm finding it really interesting and it's sparking off lots of questions in my mind, which I'm just sharing with my support officer, actually. But we do need to pick up the pace a bit. So if I could just ask you to be a bit shorter, briefer in your answers, because we are falling behind and we wanted to get the benefit of Alice's comments on a number of other areas that we're still to come to. The next area of questioning is going to be picked up by Assemblymember Zach Polanski, and we're going to talk specifically about parklets and curbside strategies.
Thank you, Chair. I do also just want to echo everything Alice just said, though. I think we hear sometimes about these fake tensions, I think, between electric vehicle charging points and trees, but trees have to win. I think it's as simple as that. We're either in a climate emergency or we're not, and we need to reduce traffic. And anyway, I'm not here to give evidence, but I just wanted to applaud that. Deirdre, we've talked a lot about curbside strategies. Lambeth has been listed as one of the ones with a good curbside. It's been award-winning, particularly alongside Suds. Other plans with other London councils?
Yeah, thank you for the question. As you say, Lambeth's strategy is award-winning, so it's a real template, I guess, for other councils to look at. But Hounslow also have recently agreed a strategy. And I think other boroughs are incorporating elements of curbside strategies in their existing transport plans. And as an example, in Ealing, we have implemented a pilot programme called FUN, which stands for Free Range Urban Neighbourhoods. And that's all about bringing greening and actually play as well, which is another interesting sort of co-benefit of all of this stuff. And bringing play and greening to our streets. So, it's similar, I guess, to the curbside strategies that you have in some other London boroughs. I think it's a really exciting area of work. The issues that Alice has raised and that you've mentioned yourself are all about, I suppose, finding that balance between motorists and the continued need for parking in London, but also the absolute imperative to create not only ways of addressing the climate crisis, but also just ways of making our city more pleasant and more attractive. I don't think people want to walk around in a city that is dirty and smelly and grey, and we want to live in a green city. And so the curbside strategies, I think, are a way of doing that. The Hounslow strategy, I know because I live next door and I went through the consultation in detail. They did a consultation with local residents to find out what they wanted and what their kind of aspirations were. So these strategies are built on built on discussions with local residents and ensuring they're fitting in with the aspirations of local residents. And it's about, as I say, that balance between all road users. Work that I've done locally in Ealing, we've got an area where people are quite unhappy about the speed and volume of cars that go down their street. Now, there are also some Victorian homes with not a lot of perhaps on-street parking. So there's a lot of parking down that street. But people are willing to give up and to consider giving up some of that parking if there are ways to make the street look less attractive as a rat run. So there's co-benefits of curbside strategies and of greening the urban environment that aren't just about climate emergency, but also about just making London a more attractive place to live.
Is that area Southall by any chance? Because I went to visit recently and residents were really unhappy about the kind of speed of traffic and the lack of green space.
The specific area that I was mentioning there was actually in Central and South Ealing and the Northfields ward. But in the Southall area, we've got a big project called Get Southall Moving, and that is a project that looks at a whole host of different interventions that include new cycleways and also greening the area, potentially looking at areas of grey space in the central reservation, turning them into grass area, into trees. It's quite an extensive project, in fact, and we've done significant engagement on that. But it reflects, I think, work that's done across London. This is both from an organic perspective and from a kind of formal strategic perspective. It's happening in almost every borough across London, where we are looking at taking back those grey spaces at the curbside and making much more innovative use of them to really just overall make London a more pleasant place to live.
Thank you, Deirdre. Sam, if I can turn to you. Are there plans to further require councils to do this kind of thing or even to incentivise them in the future?
I think I'll be able to speak more generally about the importance of integrated land use and transport planning. I mean, the challenges that have been talked about, they're real challenges, but it's also what makes our job so interesting, I think, is that we're trying to strike all those balances, find the right way and take everyone with us. We have the Mayor's Transport Strategy, which you know well, which seeks to reduce car use as well as encourage mode shift. And the boroughs have to produce local implementation plans to explain how they're going to achieve that. So we look for boroughs to find the right way and, in terms of how they would implement those policies. But I can't really say much more in terms of specifics because I don't know about future plans to develop guidance on this specific issue around use of curbside space.
In the event that borough isn't behaving themselves, or behaving themselves is the wrong frame, they're not doing the work that needs to be done.
Yeah.
Would you like to see more powers, or would you like to see the mayor finding new creative ways of encouraging boroughs to get on board?
I don't have any specific ideas. I think the collaboration that Oliver's talked about is very real, and I think that is our key tool for success, is working closely together, focusing on the benefits and the positives of what we're trying to achieve and find the best way to minimise the negative impacts. But I don't have any specific desires for anything particularly different on this point.
Thank you. Yeah. I may have one for you, and it's with Alice. Alice, I know you're running a brilliant campaign with the climate change charity Possible around parklets. What's been the impact of the campaign so far?
Well, what we're running is a campaign around parking and parklets. So
Right.
in the absence of a very clear policy, either from TfL or from boroughs on parking, we have created a parking policy benchmark. And we are working with Possible currently to assess all London boroughs' parking policies to see how, because it is one of the most important tools that boroughs have, that they can use right now, that won't cost them loads of money, that they can have a massive impact on all of what we're talking about. Parking policy is so important. So we're doing that assessment right now as we speak, alongside Possible. Part of what that's about is saying you can create parklets. And so the key issue with parklets is that it's very difficult for somebody to just say, I don't want to park a car outside my house, I want a parklet. It's very, very hard. It's almost impossible to do. If you want to do it, it can take 2, 3, 4 years. Your borough may have some kind of, policy on it, or it may not. So, that's a kind of ongoing campaign. But I would say much more importantly for me is the more general issue about parking policy as it relates to how we go about implementing everything that we need: bus lanes, cycle lanes, SUDs, all of the green infrastructure. And we are still consistently putting trees on the pavements, not on the carriageway. We still have 9-lane roads right in the middle of London. If you live anywhere near the Cromwell Road, you're living on a 9-lane road in some places. Why do we need 9 lanes? It's ridiculous. Road diets, as they are sometimes called, which is about removing lanes, you can keep traffic flowing. If you have 9 lanes, you are encouraging traffic. It's just, all the evidence shows you that. So until we get on top of number of lanes out there and the amount of parking that we allow, we're not going to be able to put this stuff in. And although it looks, it feels like there's quite a rosy picture being painted, actually we're still, we're not getting on top of those things. The main roads near you, the Seven Sisters Road where I live, still 3 lanes in either direction. Why? It doesn't need to be that way. And there are lots of issues around disability which link into this as well. So it makes it incredibly hard for anybody who's disabled if they're parking the whole way down the road and no gap. And that's not a green infrastructure issue, but it's the same related issue. So, I think that's parklets is just one part of the bigger picture, really, which needs to change.
Is there anything you'd like to see the GLA doing specifically to help accelerate your campaign?
on parklets?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, there's a big London Parklets campaign which aims to make sure that all boroughs have a consistent and simple policy for enabling people to apply for a parklet, either a community parklet or a business parklet. And so they could certainly support that in terms of funding, helping that to make that happen.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. We're now going to move on to Assembly Member Bakari. Henna Bakari. Henna, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to pick up on the parklets, Alice, because the launch of your parking action tool in May 2023 had a target of 25% of curbside space that would be for trees and rain gardens to help reduce flooding. Do you think has that been achieved, and what have been the challenges to achieve that target?
So 25% would be to reduce the amount of space given to parking, basically, rather than just green infrastructure. That would be for anything from a bus lane to a cycle lane to or anything supporting either active or sustainable travel or green infrastructure. I'm not even close to thinking about it, really. Only Lambeth has a curbside strategy. Only Hounslow has done a curbside and parking policy aligned. And the alignment is what's so key. So until we have boroughs doing that, we're not going to be reducing the amount of space given to car parking, so car parking for private cars, while guarding against front gardens parking.
So is there some kind of discrepancy amongst how parklets are approached by councils? Because I've seen some parklets that are green, but I've also seen parklets that are being used as an extension to a restaurant, for example, where there's no greenery, it's just tables and chairs. So is that the confusion? Is that the challenge that we're having here?
So on parklets particularly, there are different ways of using a parklet. One might be simply to create a space for people to sit for the community, and the complication there obviously is that the council will need reassurances that somebody is going to look after it and that it's not going to be dangerous, that it's got public liability insurance and so forth. So if in a way it's simpler to do that with a business, because they can make that contract directly with that business, and that could be in the road, in the carriageway. Obviously if it's on the pavement, there's a different pavement licence. So you can have a community parklet, you can have a council-run parklet where they've built it, paid for it, and keep it tidy themselves, or you can have a community parklet, and those the ways those work, the ways each of those work would be different council to council. So it's really about trying to say, let's have a consistent approach. But it's much like that for anything, like trying to park a dockless bike. Is different across the whole of London, so those things all need consistency.
Simon, have you had a GLA approach to making sure that we can have that consistency that Alice has been talking about?
I'm afraid that's not part of the kind of policy area that I look at, so I'm unable to
we can't help
respond to that, unfortunately.
No.
But
okay, all right,
take
thank
it away
you.
if you like, but sorry.
I'll move on to my main areas of question, which is about green bus stops. Sam, if you can help me with this. TfL conducted a trial in 2020. There were 5 new bus stops that were green. Are there any plans to introduce any more?
Thank you for that. Yes, so we have been trialling green bus stops and learned quite a bit from it, actually, in terms of the challenges of making sure we've got the right system and maintenance in place to make sure they're successful. And we're still learning from that at the moment before we consider rolling them out more widely. Of course, they're one of the tools to provide more green infrastructure across the network, but we need to think about the make-up of the green routes on bus stops to ensure that they survive and that we can minimise the maintenance costs in terms of watering and things like that, but maximise the benefits. So we're still very much trying to understand what will make the right approach if we were to roll that out more widely.
I understand that there were 30B bus stops in Leicester. Have we looked into that in terms of how we can perhaps have something similar in London?
Yeah, well, we, as part of the green bus stops, we were talking to other cities and looking around and learning. But I think that, it's only till you start to do it that you understand your own challenges and how you can make it more successful. So at the moment, there is no plans to roll it out more widely, but we're continuing to learn from the 5 that we've got at the moment. And if we can find a more viable approach to the green bus stops in terms of making sure they're successful, that the planting survives, that we're minimising the maintenance costs, then that could be potentially be something that we might do more widely in the future.
Okay, great, thank you. Deirdre and Oliver, what are your experiences of boroughs in implementing street transformation projects, such as those funded by the Mayor's Green and Healthy Street Fund? Should we start with Deirdre first?
Yeah, I think across London, the funding, we often get like different pots of funding that we bring together. So certainly mayoral funding helps with that. So we also receive. One of the issues with funding in London that we have is that we've often been left out of national funding. The recent potholes funding was the first time London was actually included in national funding. So we're very reliant on funding from the Mayor and via the LIP programme for a lot of what we can put in place in London. And I think some of the discussions that we've had earlier about joint working with TfL and the different stages that we have to go through, both with an application and with working through the detailed design and consultation. All of that takes quite a lot of work and a lot of close working between the boroughs and TfL. I think there's always room for improvement in that, both from our side and from TfL's side. There's always a case for more joined up working. Sometimes we've got projects that cover our network and the TfL network, and there can be a bit of a disjoint between the delivery timescales for both of those. So it's not always easy to make sure we deliver a project in a sort of a seamless and consistent way. So there's certainly more I think we could do to work together. But the funding that we get via TfL is, absolutely crucial, I think, in moving this work forward. And I think over the last number of years, the focus on, not just, as I say, repairing and replacing, but actually repurposing our carriageways and our pavements. The GLA and the Mayor's focus on that has been key in making sure we're able to deliver on that in the boroughs across London.
Oliver, and could you kind of add to that, and also whether there are other funding sources that have been available to you in terms of these projects?
So the one you mentioned is, we've got 3 successful schemes from it. These are all in and around, I'm trying to think of the easiest way to describe it. It's essentially close to the border of Camden and Islington. So if you go up Camden Road up to the top of the hill, it's on the east side there. So it's Cliff Villas, it's Camden Square kind of territory. And these are, good schemes. They're kind of dealing with rat running and trying to kind of change some of the kind of probably overly large kind of highway areas to add greening, add new trees, add suds into those kind of spaces. One of the other kind of funding pots that is fantastic for us from TfL is the Liverpool Neighbourhoods Fund. So we're continuing with that work in Holborn to try and connect, trying to change that very hard kind of transport kind of area there. Unfortunately, that area does see a lot of issues with people being knocked off their bikes, and unfortunately deaths do have occurred there. So changing that area is quite key for Camden Council. It also then obviously connects quite nicely in with what I mentioned earlier about our Bloomsbury corridor. That adds the kind of east edge to that kind of band we're looking at. So it's helping to do the kind of development work, and that's one thing where these funding streams are really helpful to develop the kind of pipeline of deliverable projects. As funding has reduced over the last 10 plus years, that is where local authorities' capacity has really been diminished, is having a pipeline of ready to do projects. We're having to lurch where the funding is available, and that does mean you then get misbalance. So these kind of projects are quite helpful to help us focus in the right places and do the development work to lead to better schemes in the long run.
Can you tell us a little bit about the experience that both of you have had with, you know, the competing priorities for road space? I mean, Alice was talking about this earlier, but you know, there's residents who will want space for their cars and parking alongside residents who also want greenage, and also residents who want better drainage. So, how do you deal with all those kind of competing factors and resident needs? I mean, I know as a councillor, I've got residents asking me for, you know, parking in their driveways. Is there a way of combining all of that together to make sure that there is still drainage and parking and ways of tackling all these competing needs?
Yeah, I think actually talking to residents and bringing them on the journey with us is absolutely key. And, you know, I think boroughs across London have learned this over the last few years of, you know, I think radically changing our approach when it comes to our streets. And we've learned that it's not something that you can just impose on people. It's not something you can just you know, turn around and do in 24 hours. It takes a long period of discussion, consultation, you know, design, redesign, going back again to a scheme in order to come up with something that residents think is, you know, ticking all of the boxes that you mentioned there, and is also, you know, reasonable, makes sense, and seems fair. I think those are all of the things that we have to ensure that we do. And, you know, as a result of that, I think our highways staff have kind of transformed from being perhaps more technically orientated staff to becoming much more adept in community engagement and understanding where local residents are coming from. They're able to, you know, talk now much more about the health outcomes of road schemes. As I mentioned earlier, we're in Ealing incorporating play and child-friendly streets into what we're doing. So we, you know, now our highways officers are able to talk about, you know, can we put a swing or a slide on the corner of this street, which is not something 10 years ago you'd have highways officers talking about. So I think that's what it's all about in terms of bringing residents with us. It does mean that whereas in the past we might have been able to do things quicker, it does slow down the process because we want to make sure that we bring residents with us and that we achieve that balance between the competing needs for the carriageway. And the time is, of course, money. The longer it takes, the more resources that we need, and the more funding that we need. And that, of course, is another challenge. And we've, you know, raised that a few times in the discussion. We need not just the capital funding to actually put the schemes in, but then we need the revenue funding to be able to maintain those schemes. And as Oliver was saying earlier, you know, maintaining a road that we've greened is completely different to maintaining the previously very grey space. It costs more money, money that councils don't have. So all of, you know, focusing on taking the residents with us does mean that there is a concomitant impact on cost, and probably then, definitely then, on the volume of what we're able to do. So it does, you know, overall, I guess, reduce what we're able to do because it's going to take longer, it's going to be more intense. But that's the only way to produce sustainable schemes that we can get residents behind, where residents accept that sometimes there might be a case to lose some parking provision in order to perhaps increase the resilience of an area to flooding, for example. We have to take the time to explain that to people and to get their support for that approach. And that takes time and that takes money, and that's just the way it is.
I think it's a fantastic answer, and you know, it's very localised, so you can't expect what you heard on one street to be the same on another street. Yeah. You know, it's residents are obviously kind of paramount to the local authority, but we do have a lot of commuters. Our daytime population is very different, so we have to remember that we need to listen to everyone that uses those spaces. Only last month I heard a deputation from a motorcycle user group who were very unhappy about a motorcycle parking bay being removed just off Euston Road, which was replaced by greening and removing removing parking space in that area because there was extra spaces nearby, so we didn't think we needed it because they felt that was done like deliberately against the motorcycle community. And it's quite interesting there's lots of different views, and it's about making sure we're trying to plot the balance on that very the right way each time. And like the councillor said, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of time, but it is something we do, and we do it very transparently. And I think that's it's key, is to make sure that people have confidence that we're doing it the right way each and every time that we do it.
One of the things I get this all the time as a councillor is people saying, why can't we just have park our car right in front of our house, use the driveway, and yet we can still make our driveway have sustainable drainage. We can, there are ways of doing that. Are councils able to facilitate that easily? Because I think they're struggling right now to do that. There's so many legal requirements of how much space they need for access into the driveway, and this is a real challenge, isn't it? There must be an answer to this that allows people to have that access to park outside and still allow drainage. Why are we still struggling?
I mean, there's absolutely no way in a city like London that we could ever guarantee as councils that you can park outside your home. And we really have to start from that position. We can't guarantee people can park outside their home. There simply isn't enough space for that. But in terms of the dropped curb and actually having parking space within your front garden, I know increasingly councils are saying that dropped curbs need to be permeable. Yeah. So you see it in a lot of London boroughs now, where instead of either tarmac or concrete, the dropped curb is actually grass with a sort of, I'm sure there's a technical term for it that Oliver will know. Yeah, but there's a name for the actual thing, I think, but it's a kind of a mesh over it. So that allows the drainage to still happen even with the parking, the drop curb to allow for parking in someone's front garden. All boroughs are trying to discourage people from paving over their front garden. But I suppose at the end of the day, it is your front garden, and there is no kind of national rules against doing it. What we can do, however, is you can't have a drop curb unless there is sufficient space in your front garden that you're not overhanging the front of the garden, and you might constitute an obstruction on the pavement. So we do ensure that we robustly regulate in terms of that approach. But I think there is room for much more work encouraging people to use those kind of permeable solutions in their front garden. And also, I know that the chair didn't like the word depaving, but there may be front gardens that could lose some of the concrete or pavement, and perhaps put in, I guess, your own rain garden in a previously paved space. So there's work we can do around that. I know one of the approaches we're taking in Ealing is taking into account that so much of London is people's front and back gardens. We are looking at, I sort of like a London in Bloom type approach, where we give prizes for the best front garden, the best back garden, and that would include where people have taken back their front garden from parking space into green space. Right. And that would be a way of kind of positively offering a carrot for people to be encouraged into doing that.
Thank you. Alice, do you want to come in and very quickly on that, and then I'll finish there?
Yeah, I've been doing a huge amount of work on front garden parking locally, so I just thought I'd chip in. I mean, it is a gigantic problem. It's the horse has bolted, basically. If you live in outer London in particular, some boroughs, virtually every garden is paved. Although, obviously, boroughs try to make sure that some of that is permeable, that often compacts very quickly, and so water runs off anyway. Even though if there's a drain there, then the drain's going into the sewers anyway. So you're not actually absorbing any water in that front garden, almost certainly, and after a year or two, probably nothing. So it is a gigantic problem. So obviously councils can't stop you know, the law says that you should be allowed to park in your front garden, which is, it needs to end, basically. There's in my view, you have to repeal that law. Councils shouldn't be forced to enable front garden parking. It effectively privatises that bit of carriageway, the road where you park into your driveway. And councils should be doing everything they can within what is legal to discourage any further conversion of front gardens. And I know that Kensington and Chelsea have managed to win a court case which said that they could preserve their front gardens because they needed the on-street parking. They need the space for on-street parking. So that's an important legal precedent which other boroughs can hopefully use. Obviously, Kensington and Chelsea are very different to, you know, Enfield, so forth. So huge problem. But in my view, the only answer is that you do not allow front garden parking, and that front gardens should remain unpaved and not just permeable, but with a truly a surface which truly absorbs and can grow things in. So it's actually a planter, or a suds planter even.
Thank you very much. I'll just remind everybody we are really seriously running a bit behind now, so if everyone can keep their answers and their questions brief. I'm going to switch the questions around because I know that Alice Roberts does need to get away, and we're going to talk about SUDS now. So we're going to come back to Assembly Member Zach Polanski, who's going to start the questioning on SUDS. Thank you.
Thank you. Deirdre, how is the London Surface Water Strategic Group taking forward priorities for increasing SUDS, and what are the biggest challenges?
Thanks. I'm actually a member of the London Strategic Water, the Strategic Group, sorry, Surface Water Strategic Group, and so it's been really interesting to be involved in that over the last year or so. I guess what we often don't realise is that, you know, really across London there hasn't previously been this strategic focus on surface water flooding, and it was really only in 2021 when we had a huge amount of flooding in the London area that it became clear that we weren't working strategically, we weren't working in a joined up way, and we needed to start doing that. So the work really only got off since that point. But the strategic group is, I think, doing really, really good work, bringing together all of the core, groups that you need involved in this work, including the Environment Agency, Thames Water, London Councils, which is, I'm one of the representatives of London Councils, and various other bodies. The focus is on getting together a strategy that we can implement on a London-wide basis, because previous to this, it's been very much each London borough had their own approach, and we didn't have a joined-up approach across London. So it is putting together a London-wide strategy that is deliverable. Also, it is around identifying a map. We're putting together a map of strategic opportunities for SUDS interventions. So big SUDS projects that can make a significant impact across the whole of London. Because I think one of the things to, I suppose, understand about flooding, and I've learned more and more about it over the last couple of years, is that, you know, it obviously doesn't respect borough boundaries, which of course was the mistake with our previous approach, because a lot of flooding, even the surface water flooding, some of the key areas are around London's rivers, so whether it's the Brent or the Wandle, and they, you know, go across London. So we do need to work in that way, and there are SUDS projects that will go across various boroughs, but that might be linked up with one of those floodplains to do with one of London's rivers. So we're putting together a map that identifies those. Funding, you know, and it's kind of the refrain of today's discussion, funding is absolutely key. Where do we get the money to implement both those strategic projects and the more localised projects that boroughs are keen to work on? So we are also putting together the sort of map of funding opportunities, and along with the need that we're identifying, we then hope to be able to encourage, lobby, influence funding pots in the future. Because, you know, at the moment, again, it's a competitive bidding situation where each borough goes up against other boroughs to try and get money from the Environment Agency or from Thames Water or the Mayor to implement some of this stuff. But we do need to do it more strategically and probably based more on need rather than who can write the best funding bid. But in terms of the strategic group, it now meets regularly. We have a new chair that we've appointed. We have staff working for us, which is always you know, a very positive sign. And we have commissioned a body to assist us in writing the strategy. And core to that strategy also will be around communication, because I think a big area is how do we communicate with residents in London about the challenge that flooding is going to increasingly come to us over the years. How do we explain what the flood risk is in a way that people understand and know how to act? And how do we, I suppose, link that up with some of the questions asked earlier with, you know, the curbside strategies, how that also links with flooding. So the reason perhaps we put a tree outside your house is because we're trying to stop your area flooding every few years.
Absolutely. I'll come on to TfL in a moment, but last week I was caught up in the floods in Hackney. Over this weekend I've been in Worcestershire, which has been really badly flooded in Worcester. They spoke to me about some of the problems there is around private land and not being able to access data about where it would be able to implement SUDs. How much of a problem is private land and that access to data in London?
Yeah, data is absolutely core in doing some of this work, and I think that is going to be in the strategy that we're putting together, is how we bring the data together from all of the boroughs. Again, you know, it's quite localised data that we've got at the moment, and it's quite a patchwork with some boroughs having a lot more data than others. So that is going to be one of the key areas of work, bringing that data together. However, you know, there's still a lot that can be done even with the data that we've got. So we, you know, I think most boroughs already have a pipeline of SUDS projects. I don't know if pipeline is maybe a bit of a pun word there, of SUDS projects that we're bringing forward. And Waltham Forest has been mentioned already by Alice, and they've done great work with the National Flood Forum and identifying both larger and smaller SUDS projects in that borough. In my own borough, I mentioned earlier in Northolt, where Bellevue Park, we're putting in a SUDS project there. We've also Dean Gardens in West Ealing. We've got a very innovative SUDS project where we've taken six sewers that used to flood the highway, a very busy highway. We've now linked them all with a underground repository for the water, which is not in plastic repositories. It's a eco-friendly material. It's the first time it's ever been used in London. And on top of that, we've put a kind of a wildflower meadow, and that will let the water seep out slowly over the drier months. So it's a much more sustainable way to collect up that flood water and then allow it to keep that park, I guess, watered in the drier months. So it's a very sustainable approach. So I think all boroughs have those kind of projects already lined up. So whilst we do need more data about where the risk is and identifying further projects, there's already a lot there that could be funded, and we need, you know, more funding for that. We do get some from both TfL and the Mayor's Office and from Thames Water, but we do need more funding, and it does need to probably be more on a national level, where there's a more strategic funded approach on a national level as well.
Thank you. Sam, in terms of TfL's future pipeline targets, how are you managing to make sure that that's on track? I think of the 5,000 square metres per year SUDS installation target.
Yeah, thank you very much. Deirdre did a brilliant job of describing the London Surface Water Strategic Group work, which is just essential. I think we know because of climate change we're going to see much more intense downpours and increased rainfall generally, and it's just not feasible to upgrade the Victorian drainage infrastructure, so we're going to need to manage it across the surface. So that collaboration, because it only takes one point of weakness to undermine the whole system, is so vital. we recognise very strongly the value of sustainable drainage. So we're at the moment seeking to maximise the delivery of sustainable drainage whilst we develop that more strategic approach and opportunities in terms of the mapping exercise that we're contributing towards. So to date, we've delivered over 6,000 square metres of sustainable drainage, but in our adaptation plan, we actually committed to increase our delivery rate, which was around 500 metres a year, to 5,000, as I think you may have just highlighted, which is a tenfold increase. But actually this year, we're going to be delivering close to 8,000 square metres, and in the pipeline, we've got about 20,000 square metres over the next couple of years. So we fully expect to actually break through that 5,000 square metre kind of minimum target. The approach we're taking is to build it within schemes. I talked about making it default in everything we do, proactively looking for opportunities in schemes that are in flight so that we can supplement it using the dedicated funding that we've identified in the business plan, but also strengthening our case. So not just the evidence about where it needs to be, but the evidence about the financial benefit. That obviously there's financial benefit to London and Londoners, but there's a direct financial benefit to us in terms of avoided costs. And the more we can understand that case, the more we can build it more robustly into our business planning processes.
Thank you. Final question to you, Simon. How do you make sure when you've got new developments that you're offsetting any negative impacts on flood risk and SUDs?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I guess there's a variety of ways of doing that in relation to new developments that are coming forward. So in terms of, as has been mentioned, the extensive use of sustainable urban drainage systems across the new developments to make sure that that is being mitigated in relation to flood attenuation actually on the surface water runoff as local to the developments as possible. Then there's other ways in relation to, ways that we're looking examples at the moment, specifically around here in the Royal Docks. We're looking at the use of the actual docks themselves in relation to surface water runoff from developments coming forward around the Royal Docks area, under strict guidelines in relation to how that cleaner surface water can then be used within the docks as a wider flood attenuation system effectively. There's an integrated water management system that we've adopted across development coming forward in the Royal Docks. So that's a kind of specific example, very local to here in City Hall, as to how we're mitigating that across new development.
Okay, I'll move on. Sorry, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much. We're now going to come to Dr. Onka Sahota, who's going to pick up some further questioning about SUDs. Onka.
We made rapid progress.
We are making slightly slow progress overall, but hopefully moving on. I'm going to remind you about your microphone now as well.
Okay. How are the local councils taking forward the delivery of SUDs in London?
Yeah, I think I might have covered some of that in the previous response, but I do think that it's probably something that it's only in the last few years that we've had, I guess, the across London political impetus to move forward at the rate that we need to start moving it forward on. So I think just very much in the last few years, we've had probably a step change in the approach to SUDs. I think probably 5 years ago, you wouldn't have heard it too much around transport departments. And it was probably something, more that the Parks team was hoping that the transport team would listen to. But these days, it is much more part of the core business of transport departments across the London boroughs. They're all looking at doing this in various different ways. And it is about that the whole street approach that we mentioned earlier, that instead of just going in and replacing the pavement and the retarmacking the carriageway, we're not only looking at where we can put in trees or where we can put in electric vehicle charging points, and we're looking at where we can put in rain gardens, and if there's any other flood alleviation measures that we can take place on that street. So it's about having a much more holistic approach to the spaces that we are in control of in London, and making sure that that flood risk piece is always there in everything we do. So I would say it's much more mainstreamed now than it ever has been before, I think, in the history of London boroughs. But there's still a lot more that we can do. There is, as I say, room for a more strategic approach, and that's, I'm very much hoping, what the strategic group will bring. And there's room for more cross-borough working. There's a scheme in Harrow, just up the road from us in Ealing, that will have an impact on us in Ealing. So we're hugely supportive of that, and we're working with Harrow on it. But that's the kind of work that we need to see more of, because the flooding, as I say, doesn't respect those political boundaries. So we need to work much more across the board. But the communications aspect is also a very important part of it, I think, because I think residents will probably have felt, like I did, this work has been going on for years. Of course you have a strategy for working against flooding across London. They'd be surprised to know we didn't, but we haven't. And so we do need to do work to explain to residents, once we have a strategy in place, what it is we are doing and how they can help us with that. Because there will be something for everyone to do. It won't just be the role of local authorities or other organisations in London. There will also be a role for our residents, which will include changing their way of thinking about public spaces and understanding that we do need to see some change if we're going to ensure that we don't have increased flooding episodes in the future.
Thank you for that very comprehensive response, Deirdre, and also it's good to hear about all the good work going on in Ealing. Yes, Oliver.
Just to add to that as well, which I hardly agree, it's the opportunities to kind of change other people who work in the highways as well. So we're currently doing a scheme with Camden, the gas distribution network, about changing their reinstatement up at Parliament Hill, which is an area that floods quite regularly for us. So they're already doing something in the ground there. So instead of just putting back what they found, is actually working with them to make sure they're adding a rain garden and a sud in that area, and that's a really good opportunity to kind of benefit from what's already in plan, already changed, and has the lowest cost on everyone then. So,
Alice, I'll come back to you in a minute. Alice,
is it okay just to say a few things about SUDs, and then I have to go. So, yes. So I think. We talk about SUDs very generally, but actually, we need to be careful to think about on-street SUDs. So that's, when we're putting them on the street, about the big ones which might go in a park or a green space. And then there's also the stuff that's coming off roofs, and whether we can encourage households. But, with big blocks and big buildings, that's one aspect. But if we're encouraging households to put SUDs planters in their front or back garden to take water runoff from roofs, that's a kind of third aspect, and the front gardens aspect becomes quite important. So I think we've got to be clear about which we're talking about. As I mentioned, there's this huge target, so 7,000 hectares, a runoff from 7,000 hectares of hard standing needs to go into SUDs. That is a huge amount, and although talk about a certain number of square metres, by my calculations, 375,000 rain gardens is actually roughly 7 million square metres. So in that context, 8 or 80,000 is not very much. We've got to deliver a gigantic quantity. So we need the figures are a bit tricky to get your head around, because there's the actual amount of SUDs in square metres, but then there's the amount of hard standing that we need to attenuate water from. So we have to get that message across. And I agree with Deirdre that it's not just to residents, it's actually fundamentally to councils and councillors, of which as everyone knows, there are many per council, and it's complicated stuff. We've got to try and get this over in a particular way. And one of the interesting facts that I know, for example, is that the Crossness catchment, which is the whole of South London, basically, which goes to Crossness water treatment plant in Bexley, is, it's a gigantic area, and then a whole third of these SUDs are needed in that area. So, why is it that I have that piece of information when probably the local councillors across those boroughs may well not have that information. So, I've as probably Deirdre has tried to learn this stuff over the last 2 years. It's not simple. It's really quite complicated. So we need to try and get that key information out and make sure that that people generally know about it, but councils and councillors specifically. We need that delivery plan, so not just a strategy, but a clear delivery plan. So that's the thing that we're asking for. And we need roadworks. Consistently roadworks are done and roads are resurfaced without SUDs being put in. And that is an opportunity missed, and there's another 15 years before that road will be resurfaced again. So that's kind of urgent need. So I think that's about it for me on SUDs for the moment. Thank you so much, though.
Okay, and Sam, you?
Thank you. Just to quickly build on the point about coordination with utilities, I thought it'd be good to highlight the excellent work that the GLA's Infrastructure Coordination Service are doing, working with us and others to, when utilities are working in an area, as well as coordinating the street works, make sure that you can try to build in at least passive provision for SUDs or deliver SUDs at the same time, securing funding from places like, for example, Thames Water.
Thank you. Sam, I also wanted to ask you about that the Mayor stated in October 2022 that there would be a borough delivery report covering statistics on the total amount of SUDs installed in the financial year 21-2022. When will this report be published?
That might be a better one to direct to the Mayor, because that's not something I'm working on in terms of that report about borough delivery. So just to be helpful, I can speak more broadly about TfL as a strategic authority, but my primary role is us as an organisation and our assets and our infrastructure and services.
Okay, so if you're not within your knowledge, you obviously can't.
No, I'm sorry, I can't.
That's great, thank you. Chair, shall I hand it back to you about this?
Yes, I think that would be helpful. And obviously, this is the point at which Alice, and I think also, unfortunately, Assembly Member Devonish, Alice has already had to dash out. So we're going to take a break now. It's 2 minutes to 12. If we could restart at 5 past, so that gives everyone 7 minutes for a comfort break, and then we'll commence with talking about biodiversity. Right, I'm going to bring everyone back who's in the room, at any rate. Thank you very much to everybody for your answers so far. We are now going to move on to a discussion about biodiversity, and I'm going to ask Assembly Member Joanne McCartney to start the questioning on this area. Joanne.
Thank you. And my question is for Sam to start with, if I can. And I want to talk about TfL's verges. I'm very pleased that along the North Circular, where I live, wildflowers have been planted in those central verges for a couple of 2 or 3 years now, and they are a lot better than just having the bare ground that is there. But can you just explain how TfL chooses those sites, and how do they make sure that they don't impede the views of drivers and other road users?
Thank you for the question. So yeah, we're really proud of our Wildflower Verges initiative. After trialling it in 2019, I mean, there are lots of challenges around it, as I think you're aware, around sightlines, around taking the public with us as well. Because to begin with, people see it as not being a well-kept verge.
I've had a few of those.
But after a while, people get to learn and love what healthy nature really looks like, which is messy. So in terms of identifying those opportunities, it is thinking about where's most appropriate in terms of safety, in terms of maximising the opportunity for biodiversity, in how it might be affordable in terms of managing that asset in that way, and it has been a great success. So we started with a trial of around 74,000 square metres and doubled that last year to 130,000, and actually we're going to try to double it again. It is one of the best ways to provide biodiversity and improve in terms of climate resilience, helping the London to drain better, in terms of filtering water that runs off from the road network and things like that. So it's a case of rolling out, taking the opportunities where we can. And one of the best things that we're finding from it is it actually looks like it's going to be cost neutral for us in terms of how we manage that asset.
Good. And can I ask, how do you monitor the impact on biodiversity that these schemes have had?
Yeah, so monitoring biodiversity more broadly, we're doing through our natural capital account. It's our kind of starting point, looking across all the benefits and getting a real deep understanding of those assets and the species that we've got. And the natural capital account tells us that the value of our natural estate is in the order of 328 million in net present terms. And we expect that to actually be an underestimate, because as evidence and our data improves, we'll get a stronger understanding. What we need to make sure we do is that we are delivering biodiversity net gain and managing our biodiversity through everything we do. So it is built into our management system that people need to be monitoring the before and after of biodiversity to make sure that we're delivering that net gain either within the projects and the schemes or across the estate more broadly. And the forthcoming Green Infrastructure and Biodiversity Plan that you talked about will provide some more details to where we've got to in our journey in maximising biodiversity on our estate.
Thank you. And can I turn to Deirdre and Oliver just quickly as well, because you obviously have the majority of roads with verges and also parks, and residents do like to see them well tended and cut. How have you been able to rewild those, if you like, and increase biodiversity whilst hopefully taking the public with you?
Yeah, I think it is a challenge for some of the reasons that you've mentioned already, Joanne. But what what many boroughs are doing, including Ealing, is on the highways where we are rewilding and putting in wildflowers. We've actually developed our own highways mix of flowers, so particularly chosen. It's a bit like right tree, right place, I suppose. It's a similar approach. So right wildflower, right place. And where it's on the highway, we're looking at wildflowers that don't perhaps grow as high as some might, so that we can maintain those lines of visibility. And also where perhaps the dieback might not look unsightly. So we're looking for plants that can kind of tick some of those boxes for us. And we've over experimenting, I think, over the last few years, and we found a mix now that works in Ealing for us. And I know other boroughs do similar. They have specific species that they would put on the highway. In terms of sort of biodiversity beyond that, there's a number of significant initiatives happening across London that are looking at, at really massively expanding the biodiversity that we have in London. And I've got to definitely mention here beavers, because we've seen the reintroduction of beavers both in Enfield and in Ealing. You don't have to be a borough beginning with E to do it. We'll encourage anyone to do it. But I think that's something that's really captured the public's imagination. And, I think shown the way that it is possible to do really exciting things around habitat, even in a very built-up urban area like London. Ealing has probably got, a kind of more rural character where they have introduced beavers. But where we've introduced them in Ealing, it's right beside a very busy shopping centre. So it really is in an urban area. And it's, local people have been just massively excited by seeing what we can do there in terms of rewilding. There are a lot of projects in parks and new parks across London that, of course, are going to contribute to the habitat creation in London. And we've seen, say, in Harrow, we had Headstone Park, and that has a increased habitat and biodiversity there. And we've also got boroughs like, Croydon has got a new wildflower approach on all of their verges too. So, all of these aspects of rewilding and habitat creation are happening across London, both on the streets and in parks and in newly identified and newly created parks. So it is a real growth area, I think, and an area that it's much easier, I think, to get residents behind. I think beavers and other kind of animals that we're able to create space for. Residents get really excited by that, so it's easier to make those arguments, I think. And in terms of the wildflowers, as long as we're able to keep the height down and that they don't look too raggedy at various points of the year, then people do support them, I think.
Thanks. And Oliver, I take it you don't have much verge space in.
That was going to be my opening gambit, that we don't have much of the traditional kind of verge areas. Yeah. If anything, it's at the top of the heath where we have the road around the top. But they're already wild because it's environment, it's expected. If anything, we have the challenges of containing it, like we've already kind of said. I'll try and be quick because I appreciate I could talk forever. It's a hairdresser mother, apologies. So we have a scheme where we call it conservation-led maintenance. So we've, for quite a number of years, aligned with our current contract, sort of 7 years, we've been looking at the species that we plant and removing species that are less conservation biodiversity kind of beneficial, but maybe beautiful flowers. So we don't do annual planting. We have a long program of removing roses and replacing them with more kind of climate resilient mixes, so like lavender and grasses that mean that they'll be there much kind of longer. We do schemes in housing estates where we have some of the same challenges where people think it's just unkept and we're not doing our job if we leave the grass longer than a certain length. And the other challenge there is the misuse for dog toilets. When grass gets a little bit longer, you tend to find a lot more litter, a lot more dog feces in it. And if somebody's living next door to that, that's unsightly and not right. So we have to contain it, and we very deliberately have those areas, so we mow around them, I'm sure, like Sam does. We mow around them to show that we have been there. It's just the majority of it is actually left there for kind of nature. So we have to have quite a strong comms campaign. We have to be quite on the front foot, signage to make sure people kind of understand what's going on there. There's a great one by the university, by the hospital in Hampstead. We have a sign about yay big saying, we do manage this area. It is for nature, therefore we only mow it once a year. Just so people are really clear about what's going on. On your question about monitoring biodiversity, we use Giggle quite a lot to kind of capture the information about what species are in the borough, and we do specific projects with different organisations, so butterfly counts, bird monitoring, etc. The one I particularly like is Hogwatch, and there's a population hedgehogs in northwest Camden. So we worked with Hogwatch from London Zoo to kind of do some monitoring in some of our parks with the cameras that work overnight to see where they'd extended to, and I know the Heath had also engaged in that as well. So we're constantly trying. Not to sound like a broken wheel, but we have one nature conservation officer. So what our capabilities are rely a lot on like citizen-esque science, where we need eyes on the ground and people who are engaged in this to help us along in the work.
Thank you. Can I just go back to Sam, if I can, quickly? And that's about the use of pesticides, which obviously has a detrimental effect on wildlife. But TfL has reduced the use of pesticides on the road network by, I think, between 70 and 80% over the last 3 years, primarily by reducing how often it sprays or treats. I understand there's been recent trials to reduce that further. Could you just tell us a little bit more about that and how perhaps you are sharing the results of those with our local authority colleagues?
Yes, of course. So as well as reducing the amount that we spray, we're also diluting it and trying to understand what's the minimum that it can be used in order to still be effective, because clearly one of our primary objectives is to ensure that the road network is safe as well as on our wider transport network. Some of the other trials we've been experimenting with is manual removal of weeds, as well as electricide, which is quite a fancy name for just electrocuting plants, essentially. But the big challenge we've got is around affordability of the network is so extensive, we've got so much to cover, and those more manual approaches, including just removing by hand or electricide, are really difficult, particularly when you're dealing with a live network as well, about when you'll actually have access to the network. We talk about it quite often. I don't know about specific sharing, but we're happy to. I'm sure my colleagues in network management are often talking to colleagues in Borough, so I wouldn't be surprised if they're sharing their insight and understanding. But we continue to look for options for reducing the use of pesticides and further, and welcome any ideas or suggestions people have got for things that we can trial and explore more.
Thank you. Can I bring Simon in as well? Obviously, your role in the GLA's Land and Property Limited, your assets and often existing, but also building lots of new, particularly if you look around this area here, for example. So what do you do in your day-to-day operations to make sure that you improve biodiversity and that you make sure that the Mayor's greening targets are built into your plans?
Yeah, thank you, Assembly Member McCartney. So there is, as you say, we're responsible for, there's 635 hectares of land that the Mayor inherited at the time in 2012. There is a mix of controls that the Mayor has over that, in the sense that a lot of that is already built out, but then there is operational land that is maintained for income and employment generation, as well as land that obviously is then taken into the market for with delivery partners to come forward with development. So there's a kind of a mix of ways that land and property assets are used. In the day-to-day operations, then effectively how we do that, just I guess succinctly in a very sort of quick response, I guess, is in relation to the day-to-day management of the land that we still own. There are specifics in relation to the landscapes contractors that we use, for example, in terms of the Mayor's greening policies. So there's already been touched on in relation to pesticides, so we do not use pesticides on the Mayor's land. It is all weeds, etc., are all physically removed. There is no use of pesticides. Also, we adhere to things like no mow May in relation to the kind of biodiversity improvements that can happen at that particular time of the season. And then there are also, in terms of the actual developments that are coming forward, we seek to bring them forward with delivery partners, clearly in relation to the London Plan, sustainability, and particularly the green infrastructure policies. So when we do a new procurement for getting a delivery partner to come forward to develop on the Mayor's land, we include, for example, on recent procurements, we've included 6 mandatory sustainability criteria that the delivery partners have to adhere to. So that's a sort of a mandatory contractual obligation. Some of that is in relation to aspects such as biodiversity net gain on the site. The urban greening factor is another one of those key 6 requirements that we put on those developments that come forward. So there's a number of ways that we can kind of control that development that comes forward to make sure that it is meeting the Mayor's sustainability and green infrastructure policies, and making sure that we are seeking to improve upon that as we can on individual instances, but also in relation to how we actually manage the existing estate. I mean, I've got quite a few examples that I can talk through if you like about specifics across both Royal Docks developments here in where we are in City Hall, but also helpful. Wider, if you'd like me to come.
Yeah, I think the City Hall one would be.
Yeah, so sure, absolutely. So,
and can I ask on that? I mean, Deirdre talked about the London plan being a few years old now, and so her council has set more ambitious targets than the London plan. Is that something that GLAP's going to be using as well?
So at the moment we are, as I said, we're adhering through our procurements to the London Plan 2021, but we are looking to improve on that where we can in negotiation with the delivery partners at the time. So it's kind of like that's the base absolute minimum, but we look to seek to improve upon that where we can. But if you just, like just quickly step through some examples, as I said, particularly with quite a lot of the Mayor's land ownership is in the vicinity here at City Hall within the Royal Docks, where the Mayor has the wider responsibility for the dockbed water, which is 100 hectares across the 3 docks that make up the Royal Docks, but also there's over 100 hectares of land around the Royal Docks as well. Certain things that we're bringing forward, not just on the Mayor's land, but also in relation to the wider work with the Royal Docks team, which is a joint GLA and London Borough of Newham initiative, and is using and harnessing the business right uplifts to fund across the enterprise zone. One very recent example is the work around the Royal Docks Centre for Sustainability, which is a partnership with the University of East London, where we've used enterprise zone funding together with the University of East London to create that centre. That facility, which is based in the University of East London, the eastern end of the Royal Docks, is bringing together SMEs, research, finance to explore options around kind of new tech and new products to help fight the climate crisis. On a smaller scale, but very, I guess, noticeable in relation to particularly biodiversity, we've got the Royal Victoria Dock Floating Gardens, so not that far from here. This is a pilot project in the Royal Docks to kind of understand how public spaces can be improved to create a more welcoming and inclusive environment for all. The gardens, which measure over 315 square metres, provide a floating wetland habitat, which is not just visually appealing, but is also clearly great for the wider biodiversity in that urban setting of the docks. They were installed in 2021 and they're fully accessible to all. There's also, and touching on some of the key themes that have come out so far in this committee, there was a Royal Docks tree planting programme where the team worked with the local community in relation to kind of aspirations of where they wanted to see trees planted and where they wanted to see enhancements made across the Royal Docks. And between 2020 to 2023, over 300 trees were planted. Some of that was within the area that we're responsible for, the Mayor's responsible for, Thames Barrier Park, which is clearly an operational accessible park that has now retained, I think for the 6th year, its green flag, which is something that I think we're really proud of in relation to its accessibility and the kind of use of that park. Touching on some of the themes that have come through already in terms of tree planting, one of the kind of, I think, interesting things that we've done within the Royal Docks, because of the intensity of the utility corridors, but also because of the false docks and the river walls that clearly are surrounding the docks. Quite a few of those trees that hopefully you've noticed on the way into City Hall and at lunchtime for kind of amenity space, there's significant tree planters for some of the that can hold larger trees with with larger root spread. So that's a kind of way that we've kind of got around that essentially. Another key project close to the City Hall here, which hopefully again a number of you would have noticed. In fact, I think it's pretty difficult not to notice, is the Royal Docks corridor, which is adopting to TfL's Healthy Streets standards in relation to what is quite an industrial road at the moment that's linking between Canning Town to City Airport. So that's now been funded and is partway through being constructed with the London Borough of Newham, and that's really transforming that large, fast industrial road into meet TfL's Healthy Street standards. And that includes a number of rain gardens as part of a wider SUDS strategy. And as I said, it's been funded from the Enterprise Zone Programme and from the Borough of Newham. And also there's a number of ways that we are working through the Royal Docks team in collaboration with others to set kind of master plan standards in relation to design guides being produced in relation to kind of the wider development that's coming forward in that area. And at the very heart of that is about the green standards and environmental standards.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to the last set of questions. Thank you so much for your help so far. Coming back to me to ask a few. Just like to ask, actually, start with Simon and Sam to begin with. Have you been at all involved in the Mayor's new approach within the budgeting process in terms of climate budgeting? Is that something that you've... I can see that Sam's nodding, so we'll start with you.
Yes, so we've been very closely involved working in collaboration with GLA colleagues to develop the approach to climate budgeting and implement it. It's been fantastic, I have to say. One of the objectives I always have working on sustainability is to engage as many people as possible, and I think once you get it at the heart of your approach to finance and funding, you're really on a winning wicket. And that's what it's been able to do, is accelerate that engagement and make it core to our business planning decision, but also in terms of progressing our evidence and the need to develop evidence about the scale of investment and the impact that it will deliver. Clearly it's still in early days and it's going to evolve over time, but we're really excited about it, and it's really helping focus our minds within TfL and within my team.
And do you think it's sufficiently focused on the whole area of adaptation and greening of infrastructure within the climate budgeting process and taking that as part of the approach?
That will come over time. So adaptation, as I'm sure you're aware, is kind of behind where we are on decarbonisation for everyone in terms of its maturity. And the way the climate budget is being rolled out is a phased approach, looking at our operational emissions, wider emissions, starting to build in adaptation, which has happened this year. But it's although we have dedicated pots to deliver adaptation, which I talked about, actually most of your approach to adaptation is done through how you design and deliver schemes and how you manage your assets. So it's much more difficult to quantify. But we do need to start to get to that space, going back to that point about avoided costs. We are quite good at ensuring we maintain a safe network and we're resilient. That does mean there's disruption, but we'll always seek to keep the network safe. What we want to do is move to a space where we can really understand the right investment to be able to keep the network running under different conditions, but also to reduce the cost impact that extreme weather has on our assets and discouraging customers from using public transport. That's where we really want to be, and the climate budget over time will help us develop that approach, but it's kind of early days.
Yeah, I think as a frequent flyer myself on the southern stretch of the Northern Line, where there have been some flooding incidents, I think I can speak very confidently that I and other people who use that area would be very pleased to see impacts that stop that from happening and keep the tube running, even when there are these very sharp rainfall incidents. Simon, have you had any involvement in climate budgeting as well? Do you want to just explain how that's worked out for your division?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So been involved now for the last couple of years that it's been adopted. So I guess on an operational level, looking at some of the small number of properties that we have within the portfolio, changing gas boilers to other more sustainable ways of providing that energy. Also, in terms of one of the buildings that we're responsible for, called Compressor House, at the further extent of the Royal Docks, looking at how we recently let that, and the tenant coming forward is going to have a ground source heat pump solution for that. So I think, as Sam has said, I think it's been a really good way of really focusing in on the climate crisis that we've got that confronts us at the moment, and really putting kind of climate and mitigation front and centre within the budget process for the GLA and the wider GLA group. I think in relation to adaptation and kind of the questions that you just asked, Sam, in relation to kind of, I guess this is the second year of the climate budget and the first time that we've done adaptation, so it's clearly immature in that sense, and there's clearly going to be further work on that over the coming years. But one area that we are particularly focused in on, and that's actually a joint project with Sam's colleagues at TfL, is looking at the tidal defences that we are responsible for as landowners adjacent to the Thames. So it's a joint GLAP and TfL initiative, working with the GLA's Water Climate Change team and working with the Environment Agency, and essentially we've now got funding to appoint some consultants in the very near term to start to look at our how resilient and the defences that we've currently got, and what further works and improvements are going to be required in the short to medium term to maintain those flood defences.
Yes, we've been briefed as a committee by the Environment Agency, not just the London region of the Environment Agency, but also the adjacent regional directors on the issues relating to the tidal Thames and the impact of climate change. And the patchwork of landowners along the edges of the river is quite a challenge, I think it would be fair to say. But I just wondered thanks for that. I wondered if I could bring in Deirdre at this point. As you can hear, it's very early doors for climate budgeting here at the GLA and the whole of the GLA family. Are you aware of many councils across London that have started to incorporate this, and how's it going for councils? Because it is quite complicated, measuring the Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions and so on.
Yeah, I think it's probably, the word's been used earlier, patchwork in terms of London boroughs and climate budgeting. I think, I suppose the outcome of climate budgeting really, isn't it, is just to ensure that we put climate front and centre of everything that we do as local authorities, and that we create those very clear business cases for work on climate. That's, the outcome of climate budgeting really. So in terms of that, that's already happening. I can't think of a London borough. I think almost every London borough has declared a climate emergency. So it is, front of centre for all boroughs. And, increasingly, climate is taken into account in all decision making. Whether it's, contracts, looking at contracts and what the carbon impact of contracts is, extending that out beyond, as was said earlier by Sam, extending it out beyond, the carbon calculations to adaptation and other areas as well. That's becoming increasingly important for councils. I think there is an issue in terms of the consistency of how you actually do climate budgeting and having clear standards as to how you would do it. I think there needs to be a lot more guidance and a framework on that, because with very tight budgets, councils need to be careful that they don't spend lots of time putting together loads of data that perhaps doesn't quite address what we need to be addressing when it comes to benchmarking ourselves against other local authorities or other parts of the country. So it would be good to have systems that were consistent across the country, so we could have we could properly assess projects or priorities based on the same set of standards. So I think that's a key area maybe we could look at for the future.
Yeah, I think obviously developing that consistency, the consistent approach nationally on everything from where we started from a long time ago on biodiversity net gain, how we all treat the urban greening factor, how we then put together the biodiversity net gain and the urban greening factor together with how we're addressing the climate emergency and using those as tools together with other ways of looking at what we're doing to do the climate budgeting, I think is hopefully going to be how we move everything together as we move forward. We obviously had been hoping to get some international perspectives on this. I think it's taken quite a long time for any international cities elsewhere to move ahead with climate budgeting because it is such a complicated process. But I think we might address some questions to Emma, who wasn't able to be with us, and see if we can get some comments from her in writing, because I think that will continue to be useful as we develop this at the GLA and also for councils across London. I'm going to thank you now because that's the end of our questions. Obviously, we're doing our own form of climate budgeting here in the chamber, which started off nice and warm and then became colder and colder. I'm not quite sure where we have to budget so severely that we've made our guests and ourselves so cold during the course of the meeting. But we've got a couple more items of business. Literally, we'll take a few minutes. You are very welcome to stay for them, but should you wish to maybe put your coats on, I've actually put mine over my knees just to keep warm, do feel free to go if you wish to do so, and if you need to get off. Could I ask the committee to note the report that we were provided with and the discussion that we've just had with our guests? And could I also ask the committee to delegate authority to me as the chair in consultation with the party group lead members to agree any outputs arising from today's discussions? Thank you. Item 5 is the Environment Committee work programme on pages 35 and 36. That's very short now because obviously we're coming to the end of this year. Can I ask the committee to note the work programme? Noted. Thank you. The date of our next meeting is going to be on the 7th of February at 2 p.m. in committee rooms 2 and 3. And the final item is whether or not there's any other business. I have no urgent business and I therefore declare this meeting closed.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast. This is the broadcast from City Hall. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. This is the broadcast from City Hall. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.